What's up, everyone? It's your boy Eddie from the Commander Crew, and today we'll be discussing one of my absolute favorite commanders, Edgar Markov. Edgar Markov costs 3 generic and a red, white, and black for a 4/4 legendary vampire knight that has the Eminence ability. The Eminence ability says whenever you cast another vampire spell, if Edgar Markov is in the command zone or on the battlefield, create a 1/1 vampire creature token. He also has First Strike, Haste, and whenever Edgar Markov attacks, put a 1/1 counter on each vampire you control. That Eminence ability is so powerful, and it's super easy to take advantage of to swarm the board with a ton of vampires and then use them to outvalue our opponents or just swing in for the win. Now let's kick this deck tech off with ramp and card draw. First off, we have Soul Ring. We all know what this does. This is the OG ramp spell of the format and definitely an auto include for this deck. Next up, we have our Signets. All of these cost 2 mana and ramp you by 1. These are a great addition to any Mardu build. Following the Signets, we have more 2 mana rocks. We have Felwar Stone, which is going to let you tap to add to your mana pool 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. We also have our 3 Talismans, which are going to let you either tap for a colorless or tap for one of the optional colors of your choice, but also deal 1 damage to you. Next up, mana reducers. We have Herald's Horn, which is going to reduce the casting cost of all our vampires, while also allowing us to draw an extra card at the beginning of each of our upkeeps if it's a vampire creature. Then we have Bantu's Monument, which also reduces the casting cost of our vampires by 1, but then helps to drain our opponents just by playing our creature spells. And lastly, we have Urza's Incubator, which will reduce the casting cost of all of our vampires by 2. This is going to be a great way to make casting Edgar a lot easier. And now for card draw. Well of Lost Dreams is a great way to turn our life gain into card draw. Champion of Dusk is a 5-drop that can draw you a ton of cards. Bolas's Citadel can literally be game ending. Skull Clamp fits so well with all the tokens we're going to be making with Edgar's Eminence ability. Phyrexian Arena is pretty much an auto include for me in any deck that plays black. Night's Whisper is a quick 2 mana for 2 cards. And Siphon Mine might be my all-time favorite black card draw spell, potentially netting you 3 cards for 4 mana while each of your opponents lose 1 card. Next up, let's pump up our creatures with some anthems. First up, we have Legion Lieutenant. It's a 2-drop that pumps all other vampires by 1. Then we have Captivating Vampire, which is a 3-drop that not only pumps all other vampires by 1, but also gives you the ability to steal other people's creatures. Then we have Vampire Nocturnus, which lets you play with the top card of your library revealed, and as long as that card is black, all your vampires get +2/+1 and have flying. Then lastly, we have Stromkirk Captain. It's a 3-drop that has First Strike and gives all other vampires +1/+1 and First Strike. Next up, we have a vampire that plays double duty. This is Bloodline Keeper. Not only can it tap down to create 2/2 flyers, but also it can transform into a massive 5/5 flyer that pumps all other vampires +2/+2. Next are some classics, Door of Destinies and Coat of Arms, both of which can make your creatures incredibly massive. Then we have Vanquisher's Banner and Icon of Ancestry that can both pump your creatures +1/+1 and help you to draw some cards. Next we have the Immortal Sun, which not only helps you to draw cards, pumps up your creatures, it also reduces the cost of your spells, and players can't activate Planeswalker loyalty abilities. I can't tell you how many times this one has saved me. And lastly, we have Eldrazi Monument. This card has won me so many games. It's just a powerhouse of a card. We'll be making plenty of tokens, so sacrificing a creature at the beginning of each of our turns is barely even a cost to keep all our creatures flying and give them indestructible while still pumping them up. If your opponents can't find removal fast, it's game over. Following those artifacts, we have some cards that are trying to replicate Edgar Markov's +1/+1 counter ability. We have Rakish Air, which is a 3-mana creature, which says whenever a vampire you control deals combat damage to a player, put a 1/1 counter on it. Next, we have Cathar's Crusade, which works great piggybacking off of Edgar Markov's Eminence ability by pumping your creatures every time another creature enters the battlefield. Then we have Cordial Vampire, which is a 2-drop, and whenever he or another creature dies, put a 1/1 counter on each vampire you control. Lastly, we have Drana, Liberator of Malakir. It's a 3-drop with flying and first strike, which says anytime Drana deals combat damage to a player, put a 1/1 counter on each attacking creature that you control. With all these pump effects, we're going to have some huge creatures. Now that we know how we're going to ramp into our commander, draw into other vampires, and pump up our creatures, let's talk about how we're going to swarm the board. Let's kick things off with our 1-drops. We have Knight of the Ebon Legion, who can pump himself up, Vicious Conquistador, and Pulse Tracker that make our opponents lose life every time they attack. Falconwrath Gorger, which gives all of our creatures madness in the event that we have to discard some cards. Guldraz Assassin that can help to kill off some of our opponent's creatures. Vampire Cutthroat, which has some evasion and can gain us some life. And Shadow Alley Denizen, who can give creatures Intimidate until end of turn. And on to our 2-drops. We have Blood Crazed Paladin, which is an instant speed creature that enters the battlefield with a 1/1 counter on it for each creature that died this turn. Vampire Hexmage that can remove counters from a permanent. Goodbye Planeswalkers. Bloodghast that can keep recurring himself every time a land enters the battlefield. Dusk Legion Zealot, which replaces himself when he enters the battlefield. And Gatekeeper of Malakir can force an opponent to sacrifice one of their creatures. And keep in mind, all of these creatures, the 1-drops and 2-drops, are coming in with an extra creature thanks to Edgar Markov's Eminence ability. Speaking of tokens, let's make more of them. With Kalidas, Trader of Get, we can create a token every time one of our opponents lose a creature. And that's going to happen a lot with our creatures swinging in. With Mavrin Fane Dusk Apostle, we'll be able to create even more tokens every time our non-token vampires attack. Then we can use Anointed Procession to double up all our tokens, and Kindred Charge to do the same thing, but those tokens get haste. Now we might have to exile those tokens at the end of turn, but as you'll see later in the video, that's not going to be an issue for us. Now let's talk about how we can gain some extra value. With all the creatures that we create using Edgar Markov's ability and the token generators that we've spoken about, Falconwrath Aristocrat, Pitiless Pontiff, and Yaheni Undying Artisan are going to be great additions for this deck. They're going to allow us to sacrifice another creature, and when we do, they're going to get indestructible until end of turn. Then we have Indulgent Aristocrat, which can sacrifice a creature to put a 1/1 counter on each of the vampires that we control. And Viscera Seer, who can sacrifice a creature for free to scry 1. Next up, some of my absolute favorite creatures in the game. These are creatures that gain us some additional value from all the creatures that die. First up, Calastria Highborn. With this card, we can drain a target opponent for 2 every time one of our vampires die, just by paying 1 black mana. Then we have Blood Artist and Falconwrath Noble, which can both drain a target player for 1 while gaining us a life anytime a creature dies. And lastly, Cruel Celebrant and Vindictive Vampire can eat away at each of our opponent's life totals each time we lose a creature. And on to some more damage dealers. Next up, we have Tithe Drinker and Blind Obedience, which we can use to extort our opponents and make them lose more life. Then we have Blood Tribute, which is pretty much an auto-include in any vampire build, as we can use it to drain an opponent for half their life and we get to gain all that life lost. Impact Tremors and Perforos, God of the Forge, are classics in decks that can put out a lot of creatures really quickly. And with these, we'll be able to drain down each of our opponents every time a creature enters the battlefield. Then we have Outpost Siege, which can drain our opponents anytime a creature leaves the battlefield. We do have the option to utilize the Cons ability here to help us to draw some additional cards, but honestly, it's pretty rare that we're going to be using it for that. And lastly, Malakir Blood Witch. With our really large army of vampires, this can be an absolute brutal hit to each of our opponents. Next up, let's talk about how we can protect our creatures and remove our opponents. With any build that is so focused on a large amount of creatures, protecting them is of utmost importance. And in this deck, we can do that with Unbreakable Formation, which will give all of our creatures indestructible until end of turn, but also has an ability that will allow us to pump them. Flawless Maneuver, which is an instant that will allow us to give all our creatures indestructible, and sometimes we can cast this one for free. Then we have Rootbound Defenses, which can populate our tokens while also giving all of our creatures indestructible. And Boros Charm, which can not only give our permanents indestructible, but can also deal direct damage to a target player or give one of your creatures double strike. And lastly, Teferi's Protection. What more can really be said about this card? It's absolutely amazing. Now on to the board wipes. Now I'll be honest, I'm not one who likes to run a lot of these in a deck, but when you have versatile ones like Austere Command and Merciless Eviction, who can do without them? Then we have Vandal Blast, which can take care of all of the artifacts that our opponents control, and Kindred Dominance, which will allow us to destroy each creature that isn't a vampire. Now our last category, removal. With Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares, we can remove any creature for just 1 mana. Then we have targeted permanent removal in the form of Generous Gift, Despark, Chaos Warp, Anguished Awaken, and Utter End. These are by far my favorite removal spells in these colors because they can take care of literally any permanent on the battlefield. And that's our deck today. So, what do you think about Edgar Markov? How would you build him? Notice we talked about a lot more than just the normal amount of cards that you would throw into a deck. We did that purposely. We want you guys to have options. We want you guys to build with creativity and make it all your own. Now, if you would like to take a look at my deck, you'll see that posted below in the notes. Now, if you loved this deck, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video with all of your friends. And until next time, take care.